Welcome everyone to another episode of Attorney Heart. This is your host, Fernando Flores, and I am super excited about our next guest. Steve, how are you?
I'm great, Fernando. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. I'm just really interested in your story, and I'm really interested in learning about what you do. And just to give folks a sense, and feel free to add anything else, Steve. So Steve Schwartz, he's a longtime professional LSAT coach, and he's the author of several LSAT guides. And he's most well known for creating the popular test prep site LSAT blog and hosting the LSAT Unplugged podcast and YouTube channel, which ends up covering every aspect of the LSAT and the law school admission process. And so I know that, there are listeners out there that are in the process of getting into law school, that are in the process of making a decision whether they want to go to law school, And so I really wanted to have Steve on so that he can talk to that audience and let them know what to expect, in particular for the LSAT, because that's definitely one of the key things that law schools look at. And you can talk a little bit more, Steve, if it's, the one thing. In my opinion, I've seen that there's also, other very important components like the personal statement and making sure that you're genuine and authentic in your essays. But I'll let you, the expert, talk about that a little more. But yeah, Steve actually has been coaching since 2005 and went to Columbia for undergrad. And so I'll let Steve add some more information. But Steve, well, first of all, thank you for being on. I really appreciate it. But I want to start with a question for you, and tell us just how is it that you got into LSAT prep coaching, and you've been doing it for a long time, since 2005. So if you can just let our listeners know a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, thanks, Fernando. So my journey is not really what I expected it would be, but I guess most people's aren't, right? So I was in college. I always thought I was going to go to law school. I would maybe do criminal law or politics or something like that. And I took the LSAT and I got a low score. I got the low 150s, which is maybe not low for some people, but I went to Columbia for undergrad. I thought I was going to go to a top 14 law school. And so that LSAT score was honestly really crushing for me. Mm-hmm. So I thought, man, I'm not smart enough. I'm not going to be able to do this. But I then ended up using that as kind of a fuel where I wanted to beat the exam and prove it wrong. And so I ended up doing every exam ever released at the time. There were 45 exams or so at the time.
Oh my God.
Now there's double that, believe it or not. But it was a lot. So I did all these old exams. I went to the bookstore. I got every book I could find. And I just hammered away at it. And very gradually, very slowly, I got my scores up from the low 150s to finally getting a 175 on test day.
Wow. And remind me that it's out of, is it 180, right?
It's out of 180. Yeah.
Oh my God. You went up a lot. Yeah.
But it took a long time though. I mean, it took over a year, and I certainly wouldn't want to wish that on anybody else because it was a pretty brutal process. And so after that, I had friends asking me for help with the LSAT because obviously I was a poli-sci major. I knew a lot of other folks who were going to law school. And so they wanted help with the LSAT. And I'd actually tutored other things in the past. I had tutored the SATs. I had tutored high school academic subjects. And so once I knew the LSAT, I figured, well, I could start teaching this too. And because it's more niche, there's more demand for it. And it's also more interesting in a way. I think the LSAT's a much more complex exam than a lot of others, like the SAT or even grad level exams like the GMAT or the GRE. It's harder, it's more complex, and you can't cram for it. You can't memorize it. And you also didn't learn any of this in school, right? It's not like the GMAT has math, the GRE has vocab, LSAT has neither. That's not really the focus, right? So it became a kind of obsession for me. And then I started my website, the LSAT blog, and then things really took off. I started posting articles with advice, and it got circulated online. This was I started the website back in 2008. And that was kind of earlier days of the internet when there wasn't that much out there about the LSAT. You'd Google LSAT and nothing would come up. And so any article I wrote, it got found. People discovered it and it got forwarded and shared around, and it grew and grew and grew. And then look at me now, over 10 years later, still haven't gone to law school, but that's okay. I love what I do.
Wow. So you didn't you took the LSAT, got a really good score, and didn't go to law school?
Yeah, it's funny. And, some people will always say, well, you could go anywhere with that score. Maybe. I mean, my GPA maybe wasn't what it should have been. But at the same time, though, it's I know the LSAT so deeply in a way that few other people do. And so if I were to go on to law school, then all that LSAT knowledge, I wouldn't really be able to do anything with it. And yeah, I could maybe tutor a little bit on the side or something, but I've got my YouTube channel, I've got my podcast, I have the site itself. And so I wouldn't be able to focus on those. And I also love what I'm doing now. So the question is kind of why change? I think that a lot of my motivations for law school were based on like unrealistic ideas of what the practice of law is like. I remember watching things like The Wire and Breaking Bad and thinking like, those look pretty cool, right? Like, but that's not really what it's about. Of course, there's a lot more that I'm sure you could speak to, but the LSAT, I know it, I love it. And so that's why I keep doing it.
Oh, that's awesome, Steve. That's such a great story. And, you know, we connected over email, and so I can't necessarily get the passion that you have for the LSAT as much as I do now that I'm speaking with you, you know. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. And if you were to say, like, look, Fernando, when it comes to the LSAT, to the folks that are listening who are in undergrad and are considering taking the LSAT and going to law school, these are the top 3 challenges that you're probably going to encounter as you move forward with your LSAT prep and actually taking the LSAT, right? What would you say that some of those top 3 are, just so that we can get to the nitty-gritty of it?
Yeah, totally. So I'd say the biggest challenge is not putting in enough time. And there's 2 parts to that. There's not putting in enough time over a period of months. Let's say people often want to study for only 2 or 3 months, but it takes much longer than that to reach your fullest potential. It might not take a full year like it did for me. I certainly hope it doesn't, but 5 to 6 months is not too long to invest in this process, because although while the LSAT is not the only factor in admissions, it is the most important one. Unfortunately, numbers are the biggest part of this. And so it's worth investing the time. If you think about it, you know, you earn your undergraduate GPA over the course of maybe 3-4 years or more than that. And the LSAT score is more important than that, but it all comes down to how you do on that one day. And so investing 5 to 6 months is really not too long. The other time investment challenge is fitting in the time over the period of a week or over the period of a day. And so I'll encourage students to block off time in their schedules, maybe on the weekends. If they're working, maybe before work, get to the office early, maybe after work, stay at the office or find a coffee shop nearby, even during lunch, squeeze in the time wherever you can. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is finding the time and choosing to invest the time. The second thing I would say is not investing enough in the right prep materials, or not even necessarily doing the research for the right prep materials. It is incredibly important to use real LSAT exams. A lot of people are using books with fake LSAT questions, or maybe using old books that have writing in them that they got from a friend. And I understand, of course, everybody wants to save money, but you don't want to spend hours and hours erasing a book that you could have bought for $20. It's worth investing the time in just getting the right books, getting the real old exams so that you can study from those, not using any old book you find in a bookstore. Make sure that it says it uses real LSAT prep tests.
And there's a lot more, you know, materials to prepare for the LSAT now, I assume, than there were 10 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
Back when I was studying, there were like 40 something exams released. Now there's over 90 actually. There's 86 that are numbered and then a handful more that are unnumbered. And so there's no reason to go outside of those. You could do all your studying with just exams published in the last decade. That would be enough.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. All right. So I cut you off. So that's the second one. What would you say is the third one?
Yeah. So the third one relates to doing these exams. A lot of times students will do exam after exam, measure the results, maybe even like on a spreadsheet, obsessively tracking like their results. Did I go higher? Did I go lower? I went down 1 point, up 1 point. And I understand the incentive to do that because we all want to see where we're at. But the real value in doing these exams is in the review process afterwards. So I would suggest, instead of doing more exams, do fewer exams and review them in more depth. Don't do 3-4 exams a week. Do maybe 1 a week, but then spend 3 or 4 hours at least reviewing all your mistakes, everything you had trouble with, everything you had difficulty with. That's where the growth comes from.
It's incredibly, incredibly helpful to hear you give those tips. And for me, you know, I also have the bar exam game plan program. It's a 5-week program that I work with law students before they get into, you know, big bar prep, because a lot of times what happens is we don't have a game plan, right? We don't have a game plan in terms of how are we going to attack each part of the exam. And then also the bar exam, there's a lot of stress. So what's your game plan in terms of managing that stress when it comes up? How are you going to work on bringing it back down, right? And what I love about what you're saying, a lot of those tips, they're very applicable to that exam as well, you know? And so the sooner that you can start applying, you know, the tips that Steve is providing, the tips that you're providing, Steve, the sooner that you can learn to implement them in future areas of the legal professional journey. Right. And so I really like that. And one of the things about the last part that you said is I do like to mention that it's so important to have patience with yourself as you continue to improve your scores, or as you continue to improve, how well you perform. Because a lot of times we want things and we want them now, and we want them good, and we want them quick, right? And it takes a while. You ended up taking a lot of exams, and I really like what you said in the beginning, that it was a slower progression. And people should be aware of that you can improve, but it takes time. And that way you can build in the time that you need to be able to improve your scores.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's worth having the expectation that this will take longer. It will be different than what you've done before. And I'm sure the bar exam is even more than this, perhaps. But people, if your only frame of reference is the SAT or the GMAT or the GRE, you might not be prepared for just how difficult and complex the LSAT is. It really is more like learning a foreign language than something that you could really cram for, or something that even relates to what you've done previously in your academic career. I also really like what you said about having a game plan. That's actually a big focus of mine as well on the LSAT side of things. Having a plan of attack, breaking it down week by week, even day by day. One of the first things I did back when I started my site, people were asking for it, was, how do I prep for the exam? I've got 2 months, I've got 3 months, I've got 5 months. What should I do? And so I actually laid out week by week study plans telling you exactly what to do every single week over the course of your studying. So that involves like which practice problems to complete, which pages in a book to read, which articles to read on my site. And then people said they wanted even more. They said they wanted day by day. And for years, I was like, I'm not going to tell you how to divide your week. I'm not going to give you the day by day. You could figure that out. It's like divide by 7 or something. But people actually kept asking. So I finally listened to my audience and I created them. And they've been enormously successful and popular and really useful for people. Because that way, okay, well, day 1, Monday, I do X. Day 2, I do Y. Day 3, I do Z. And knowing, okay, these exact problems, these exact pages, and the exact specific order in which to do everything. And people will say, well, Monday was busy. What should I do? And I'll say, well, make up for it on Tuesday and Wednesday. It's okay. The day-by-day breakdown is not as important as the level of specificity about what to do. People really need to know the order in which to do things, because otherwise they end up falling back on just doing lots of old exams and then moving on to the next thing. But slowing down, building the foundation first, and then reviewing afterwards is more important, really.
That the game plan, and I love it because we're talking a lot of the same language, Steve. And so the game plan is really your foundation that you can build your sufficient practice on, your focused study on, right? And a lot, for me, that's one of the reasons why I failed the bar exam the first time. I didn't have a game plan for any of the particular parts. You know what I mean? And so when I decided to, okay, I'm going to invest my time in making sure that I understand, and I reviewed my scores, right, in a lot of detail, in terms of like, okay, I did okay here, but I didn't do well in this part. And I also like the tip that you gave in terms of reviewing your scores. And I'll add, when you get to the level of the bar, I tell folks, also review what you got right, because sometimes you get it right by luck. And you have to make sure, do you really understand it? Or it was just a lucky guess? So review what you got wrong, but also review what you got right. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's so true. I tell people the exact same thing. It's so funny. We're coming to opposite ends, but it's the same. We came to the same conclusions. Yeah. So when you're reviewing, it's not only everything you got wrong. It's also things that were maybe you were down to 2 and you guessed. People always say, I'm down to 2, and then I always choose the wrong one. And I say, no.
I hear that so much.
Half the time you're choosing the right one, but because you got it right, you're not realizing that you need to review that one too. You got to review.
That's a good point.
You got to review all of those. And so maybe, let's say you got 10 questions wrong, but you guessed on another 5 and got those ones right. You still have to review all 15 of those as well. And so everything you got wrong, everything you were unsure of. And then another thing you can do is anything you're unsure of, mark it down. But once you complete that section or that problem, don't tell yourself the right answer. Give yourself another opportunity to do that problem untimed and see if you got it right on both attempts, both timed and untimed. So you can see, is timing the problem or is understanding the problem? But the review process is really the biggest thing.
Got it. And I know, a lot of attorney listeners, it's been maybe some time, since they took the LSAT, but just tell us a little bit about, for the listeners who have an interest in taking the LSAT, but have never looked into it yet, right? They've never looked into it. They don't know what to expect. Demystify it. What is that, LSAT? What are the components of it? What does that look like? And let's get into that.
Yeah, sure. So the LSAT is an exam and it's much different than others, like I said. And the reason for that is that law school is much different than other academic endeavors. It's testing not necessarily material or memorization, but it's a way of thinking. And that way of thinking involves having a critical and skeptical mindset and also being incredibly detail oriented to notice slight differences in words or maybe a hidden phrase thrown in there that changes the entire meaning of a passage. Because obviously in contracts, that can make a big difference in terms of real world consequences. And so the LSAT's testing your ability to read carefully and to read critically. And so those are skills you want to hone. And the way the LSAT tests that is 3 different sections. There's logical reasoning, which are short arguments that you then have to evaluate. Maybe you have to strengthen an argument, or maybe you have to weaken an argument, or maybe you have to identify the conclusion of an argument. Then there's the reading comprehension, which are short passages that you then have to navigate longer sets of text, maybe 400 or 500 words. And then there's logic games, which maybe seem the strangest because they're more like puzzles. They're more like math problems in a way. But what they're doing there is testing your ability to make deductions, as well as to hold multiple pieces of information in your head simultaneously. And short-term working memories is a tricky thing to work on. And that's another side of this that you have to test as well. And so all of that comes together for what ends up being a pretty grueling 3-hour experience, but it's the biggest factor in law school admissions because it actually does correlate quite well with first-year law school grades.
I see. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about you, Steve. You have a lot of things going on, a lot of moving pieces. I do see the content that you've put out. It's a lot. And I just want to ask you, what are some of the things that you try to do to maintain a sense of balance, a sense of wellness and health in your own life? If you could talk a little bit about that, or is it hard, because you have so much going on? Yeah.
It's a great question. I think it is hard. I think that as an entrepreneur, of course, like there's always a million ideas going on and you want to execute on all of them immediately, but we have only 24 hours in a day and obviously other obligations and stuff. So it is hard to balance it all. I try to have certain limits on when I work and when I don't. So I try to carve out the weekends to not have any meetings. So no discussions, no coaching. I try to save weekends for family time. I also have my certain routines in the morning. So I'll walk the dog. I'll spend time with my wife and kid. I won't necessarily book any meetings super early. I try to start things at least 9 or 10 a.m. And so then I also have time to do other things like maybe go to the gym or something like that. And so I think that I might stay up late some nights continuing to work after everyone else has gone to bed, but it's a balance. It kind of ebbs and flows. I find that there are certain periods where I kind of go into hyper mode working a lot, but then I also save up that work and that way I can take it a bit easier other times at the year. And the LSAT cycle also dictates this somewhat as well, because the most popular LSAT test dates are in the summer and fall. Really, that's the busiest period for me, is maybe July through October. But the rest of the year is often a little bit quieter. And so there's maybe less coaching going on. And so for that reason, I can use that time to work more on other things like my podcast and YouTube and website, or I can also take it easier a little bit. And I do go on vacations. I have had, believe it or not, over the course of this 10 years, I have had periods where I've gone out of the country and traveled for a month or two. And kind of scheduling everything in advance will allow me to do that while everything in the business continues running smoothly.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's real talk. I've also experienced periods of very just intense go. And then periods where I got to slow it down because, you start feeling it in various different components of your health. And so you just got to, step back a little bit, make sure. And I think honestly, like the main thing for me that's really helped is self-awareness. Just staying aware of like the different components of my health, making sure that like I'm maintaining everything at the best level that I can. So, but I do agree with you. It continues to be for me a practice where I remain open to learning more and more. And I love asking that question because it's an important one. I love hearing like what other folks are doing, you know? So, and I like the aspect that you said about, you know, kind of protecting the weekend for it being family time. I have a similar thing where for me, my Sundays are, you know, family fun Sunday. And, I really try to, you know, leave that Sunday for sure. And I still, you know, put in some work on Saturdays, but, you know, I don't have kids yet. So, I know it's different, for you. You have a little one, so you gotta protect that time.
Yeah, I guess one other thing I would say is, like, let's say like taking a vacation, for example. Like I might have a vacation on the calendar where I'm going away for a weekend or even longer. And I like very begrudgingly want to go on that vacation because I have all the work stuff. And it might take honestly, it might take a day or two to disengage from like the workflow. That has happened to me at times where it's like the day one of vacation, I still have all this other stuff going on, but over time, just like put the computer away, put the phone away, you know, open that book, that novel I brought with me, and kind of just dig into that. And then before you know it, like you have to then get back into work at the end of the vacation.
Yeah.
It's always hard to phase switch in that way, but I do think it's important to save those times whenever they come up, even if it's someone else who's like pushing you in that direction. I think it's useful.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I want to ask you another question. Tell our listeners where they can find you. I mean, if they Google LSAT blog, are you still at the top there? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So Google LSAT blog, still at the top for that. The YouTube channel is, I call it the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel, but it's at youtube.com/LSAT blog. And then I also have the LSAT Unplugged podcast, which you can find on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and everywhere else.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to include, you know, all the links that you send me and everything that you mentioned so that people, when they, you know, get the information from the podcast, they could just click on it and go there. And I think this is, I really enjoyed our conversation because it's skills that that are actually more generally applicable to a lot of other areas of in the legal profession, you know. And I think even when you start going to law school, you know, all the tips that you mentioned, they're really on point. So I appreciate it. And I can, again, just sense your passion for it, which is wild. I haven't met anyone that has so much passion for the LSAT, Steve. I have to be honest with you, but I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I appreciate that, you know, that you're so open to providing support to others in this regard.
No, thank you so much, Fernando. It was really fun to see all the various parallels between what we're doing, and I'm looking forward to discussing them more.
Definitely. Well, Steve, I want to give you the last word. Do you have anything else that you want to add? You know, anything, any other tips, any other suggestions, any other comments that you want to leave our listeners with? You're on, brother.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Fernando. I guess I would say if you look at the LSAT and you get discouraged at first, don't lose hope. You are not your LSAT score. It is not your IQ. You can improve over time. I'm living proof of that. And I have many success stories on my site of others who have done the same. And also know that the LSAT score does not dictate how you'll do as a lawyer. There are so many other things that go into success in a legal career, aside from just how you do on an exam. There's people skills, there's networking, there's building business skills. All of those can play in. And so just know that this does not define you.
I love it. Thank you for that. And you heard it from the LSAT expert. And I hope that definitely resonates with you. And Steve, again, I want to thank you for being on. And I want to thank you also for tuning in to another episode, everyone. I look forward to catching you at the next one. And I really hope that you found a lot of benefit from this conversation. I know I did. And I look forward to staying in touch, Steve.